And so I'm going to go to one of the A-side hits, which is page 45. Lack of power, that was our dilemma. We had to find a power by which we could live, and it had to be a power greater than ourselves. I love this part, obviously. Wasn't always obvious to me. But where and how are we to find this power? Well, that's exactly what this book is about. All right, so let's see. I was born an alcoholic. I was a daily drinker by 17. From the minute I started drinking, I was just an all-out, blackout, all-in drunk. By 18, I had 2 DUIs. And that was my first, in 2 weeks. And that was my introduction to AA. And I thought that it was great and that I had a problem, but I didn't need to do anything about it just yet. And I took, this was in the 80s, I was living with a woman, I took a hostage, and she kicked me out. And she gave me a choice, actually. She said I could go to rehab or I could leave. But either way, I was leaving. And so I got into AA. I got into a rehab, and that got me into AA. And I was young. I was 22, and I was living in Hollywood. And at that time, AA was kind of this thing that was filtering into pop culture, and there was like clubs with rock stars and movie stars, or not clubs, I'm sorry, there were meetings with rock stars and movie stars, and it was really exciting and shiny and appealing, and I stuck around, and I didn't drink, and I knew that I had a problem, so I thought, all right, well, this is when I'm going to deal with it now, but I wasn't really I wasn't all in, and I didn't think the problem was me. I thought the problem was the alcohol. And if I just kept away from the alcohol, things would be fine. And so I wasn't looking for a spiritual solution. And so what I did was nothing. I went to some speaker meetings. I hung out with sober people in clubs. And I'm going to read something else. And this is how I felt. I was having trouble with personal relationships. I'm going to say it the way it's written in the book. We were having trouble with personal relationships. We couldn't control our emotional natures. We were prey to misery and depression. We couldn't make a living. We had a feeling of uselessness. We were full of fear, and we were unhappy. We couldn't seem to be of real help to other people. So that's the bedevilments, and I was experiencing that while I was sober.
That's right.
And so I ground on for a few more years, but I got away from the program, got away from the connection. I had no spiritual connection, and I thought I outgrew this. I thought that I had pretty much outgrew addiction, and everything would be okay. And so I drank, and I can tell you that I am an alcoholic cliche, and everything that I read in the book and everything that I heard people share about meetings happened to me, and it happened pretty quickly. And I knew that within a week that I wasn't going to be the one that ended this, and I was out for about 4 years, and I heard somebody once, this is the best description, it was like swimming in the ocean, and I could see the land, but I couldn't quite get to it, and I was worried how it was going to end, and when it did, I was married, and my wife kicked me out. She said I could go to rehab or leave,
Huh.
And
we never heard that before.
I didn't get to stay.
Man's got patterns.
And so I went to rehab, and I really didn't want to drink anymore, you know? I really, I was done. I was done. And they gave me chores, and I scrubbed the shit out of that patio, and I even cleaned the screens, you know, and they had me, you know, any writing assignment I did, and I was just there, right? I was willing. But there was something in the back of my head, you know, that said, well, maybe you got one more. Maybe you can do, maybe you can just dry out, you know. And so I got out of that rehab, and I went to a meeting. I went to a 2:30 meeting, and I was going to drink. I was going to cash in my chip, right? And but I wasn't entirely sure my wife hadn't bought a home alcohol breathalyzer test or something like that. So I went home, and then the next day I went to that same meeting with the same intention, right? Except something happened. After the meeting, some guy came up to me and talked to me about my relapse and the time that I had given up, and that was my moment. You know, I went to the liquor store and I bought 2 little airports of vodka, and I sat in the parking lot, and I had this moment of grace. I had this providence where some voice told me, or I heard this voice that said, "You've never done this. You have never even given out AA the slightest shot, you know?" And so I threw away the vodka, and I decided that I'd go on this journey, and I would try this, but I had no idea what that meant, you know? And part of my bottoming out too, I wound up in the hospital, and they thought that I had blown out my kidneys, and they were going to do an ultrasound of them. And as I was lying on the gurney to get taken into the room, I was looking up at the ceiling, and I was going to do the alcoholic prayer, God, get me out of this, and I'll never do that again. And I just didn't have it. I just didn't have any sort of semblance of a higher power or a God. So here I am. I got no plan. I got no program. I got no God, and I just am lost, you know. But I'm kind of feeling my way through, and I'm in my 90 meetings in 90 days, and I'm showing up, and I'm going to. I'm going to go through the motions. I haven't figured it out yet. But when I was newly sober too, I thought I'd get back into surfing, right? Be in the cradle of God and spiritual connection and all of that stuff. And one day I was gonna jump in the water. And as I was closing the trunk of my car, I remembered I had thrown my keys in the car, locked the keys in the car, and I'm wearing a wetsuit and nothing underneath. And some guy showed up, and he had tools, and I was going to get into the trunk of that car. It was an old diesel Mercedes. They build them like bank vaults. And up until the moment that I cut a hole in the gas tank, I thought I had a good idea, you know? And I had to get a ride. I called my sister. I got a ride home, and I'm just like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? I mean, again, I was lost, and so I told Chuck, my sponsor, this story, and he looked at me and he said, you know, your solutions are worse than your problems. And the thing is, it's like, and also within that 70 days, my father died, right? And that was my moment where I stood at a crossroads, and it's like, okay, God, I have no plan. What do I do? Show me how this program works. And that's what happened, you know? And so I started this journey of looking for a higher power. And, you know, I have experience with a higher power, even though I don't know it. I am powerless over alcohol. That's a higher power. My relationships, I either try to dominate or I make that person my higher power. So I have kind of an idea of what a higher power is. And so maybe I'll go on a journey and look for the higher power that they talk about in this book and they talk about in this program. And the book says, that I have to let go of old ideas. And one of the things that I found by reading the literature and looking into this is that all of these concepts that I had were really kind of misguided, and all of the questions and all of the misgivings that I have, when I read the literature, it actually says, no, it's kind of goes this way, and it makes sense to me. And so I remember I was in the South. I was in Louisiana, and they talk about God there a lot. And I was in a meeting, and this older, God comes up as a topic all the time. And this older gentleman shared. I'm not going to do the accent. It just sounds really racist. But he said, "I don't care what you don't believe in. All I want to know is, what do you believe in and what are you going to do about it?" He says, you don't go to a restaurant and tell the waitress what you don't want. And so it really kind of shifted this idea, okay, so what do I believe in? And when I, like I was talking about with the literature, when I read the spiritual experience, I love how it talks about that it's not this program doesn't go define what God is. It just it explains to me why I need one, why I need a higher power. And the spiritual experience, when I read that, and it said that it was a personality shift sufficient to find recovery. What a relief, God isn't out to get me, and the universe isn't out to get me. Of course, I have to change my personality, and that's like, how do I do that? How do I take, what does Einstein say? The brain that creates the problem doesn't have sufficient intellect to find a solution. So what I have to do is I have to go through this process. And step 12 starts with a promise. The promise is having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. And so what I've done is I've taken on this approach where I'm just going to go through the steps. I'm just going to do what I'm told. I'm just going to do what's written in the book and do that and see what happens. And what I've found is that you can't go through these 12 steps without having a spiritual awakening. It's an impossibility. I also heard somebody break it down the other night too, that the difference between a spiritual experience and a spiritual awakening. Spiritual experience was when I had that moment of grace, when something came in between me and alcohol, right? And that was sudden. Because I always drank. I always drank, I'm always gonna drink, and something happened that shifted my course and put me on my way. The spiritual awakening is a process, and the things that I've learned over the time have changed, And one of the things too is that, and this is my ignorant understanding of religion, is that there's this sort of bar, and I'd often felt that I missed that. I had fallen short by a great deal, and so I'm not looking to anything good in the afterlife. So why even try? But the thing is that in Bill's story, the founder of this program on page 9, he talks about how he had a problem with an understanding of a higher power. And that's where the concept of, well, why don't you put together something that makes sense to you? And that really works for me. And what I've come down to is that God is everywhere, except for in my thoughts. And so what I do is I come here and I connect. And I connect to this program and I connect to you guys, and my higher power speaks through me. Speaks through you. And one of the things I like one of the first stones in my understanding of a higher power is a dictionary definition, where God is a source of moral authority, and I know that I am not. So it's very easy for me to come to this meeting and listen to what other people have to say and take inspiration from that. The other thing too is, for me, I like the idea of the simple stuff, and I heard early on that praying is talking to God and meditating is listening. And so I mentioned my father had passed away, and so what I do is I talk to my dad. I know he's not God, but maybe you can pass him a note or something. And that's kind of what works for me, and I've heard a lot of really great things about what your higher power is like, and I can just add that to what I believe in too. So anyway, that's my time, and I would like to thank you for asking me to lead the meeting tonight. And I think for a topic, I'd like to know what do you believe in and what are you going to do about it? And that's it.